Welcome to the Hair Loss Show. Dr. Russell Knudsen and Dr. Vikram Jayaprakash discuss issues relating to hair loss and the medical and surgical treatment of hair loss in both men and women.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Hair Loss Show, episode number 2.
Today we're going to discuss the most common form of hair loss in men in the world, which occupies really the major part of the market of treatment for hair loss, and that is male pattern balding. So what is male pattern balding? The word pattern refers to the fact that the hair loss is mostly in the upper scalp. So it is very common in the world. Over 50% of men in their lifetime will suffer from male pattern balding. It's almost seen in some circles as part of aging, but it causes a lot of distress in men, particularly younger men in the world, and they seek advice urgently to try and delay or stop the onset of male pattern balding. So this is something that happens after puberty, and there is a reason for that.
Yeah, and it's something that this is mainly what we see every day on a day-to-day basis, isn't it? And as Russell said, it's a type of balding that occurs in a predictable pattern, hence male pattern hair loss. So there's a number of different factors that cause this. Some of them we have control, but most of them we don't have control over. The main thing is it is genetically spearheaded. We have identified a number of genes that control essentially the process of the hair thinning and therefore the hair loss. And so it is essentially a genetic condition.
That's correct. Now, at the moment, the two candidate major genes we have for male pattern baldness don't represent much more than about 3/4 of the balding population. So we haven't completely cracked that nut yet. There is another gene or two out there somewhere. And then people say to me, well, why can't you just switch the genes off? Gene therapy, if you like. Because they do have gene therapy for other conditions. Well, the real reason at the moment is we don't know enough. So for example, if the genes we have identified as candidate genes for male pattern baldness also control something else that we're not yet aware of, switching off that gene could have detrimental health effects for our young men. So gene therapy is not anywhere.
No, and also I'm assuming that there are going to be other genes that we haven't identified.
That's correct.
That are also play a part. But just one of the other things I wanted to mention and talk about was, because a lot of people have this misconception that, well, they don't know it's a genetic thing. They think there are other causes of why they're losing hair, of what their male pattern hair loss. And there are a lot of these myths that go around. So I think that's probably something we should quickly address.
Okay, so what do we hear from our patients when they come and they say, well, I hear it's because I wash my hair every day and maybe I'm washing it too much and that causes hair loss. Or I hear it's because you wear hats, and hats restricts whatever blood supply to the scalp, and they're too tight a hat causes hair loss. So we get a lot of these myths. We also, things that are mythical but a bit more credible, like, for example, I hear it inherits through the mother's side of the family.
Yes.
Well, the truth is, in some of our families, that seems to be more true. Whereas we can show you just as many families where it came through the father's side of the family. So the reality is, it's a bit like rolling the genetic dice. Okay, you get some genes from mum, you get some genes from dad, you roll the dice together and you see what you get with. In my family, for example, my father, bald. My elder brother, bald. Me, non-bald. My younger brother, non-bald. I've never been on therapy. I won't ever have to go on therapy. It's a hit and miss thing.
Yeah, same with my father. I'm an only child, but my father, as you know, shiny bald. So, again, there's no way of predicting, and there's no way you can run away from. Genes are something that you're stuck with. You're dealt with at hand, and you just that's one of those things you have to contend with.
So that's the first factor, is the genetics. The second major factor is male hormone. So basically, the way male pattern baldness was discovered was in the 1940s. They were doing a trial when they developed the ability to synthesize or produce testosterone, the principal male sex hormone. They were able to make it in the laboratory. So they then made it into a liquid so they could inject it into people. Now the people that they chose to inject it into are people that had had their testicles, for example, underdeveloped, or they might have been in an industrial accident and they'd been crushed or amputated. So these people had no testosterone. So they started injecting testosterone into these people and discovered that for a significant number of the people they did this to, they started to lose hair on their upper scalp. And that was the first time that we'd understood that there was going to be a link between the male hormone testosterone and male pattern balding.
In fact, I read that Aristotle actually documented or wrote about the fact that eunuchs
Did not go bald.
Did not go bald.
Well, that's thousands of years ago. People.
Absolutely.
So that was a very good insight back then. But it still means that a lot of people don't exactly accept that, which is why so many funny therapies like rubbing crocodile dung on the scalp. Over the years, there's been onion, potatoes, oiling the scalp. There's so many things that have been tried over the years, but the reality is you need a combination of genetics and male hormone testosterone. So what Dr. Vikram is going to show you now is what actually happens in the hair follicle. So just to be clear, people who are going bald don't have more testosterone in their blood than people who don't go bald. That is a myth. It's what happens in the hair follicle that determines what happens. So
to result in male pattern hair loss, the first thing you need the gene. All right, so we've talked about that. The second thing that happens, and this is a chemical reaction that happens at the level of the hair follicle. We have a hormone testosterone. That testosterone at the hair follicle gets converted into another form of that testosterone called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT as it's commonly referred to. And there's an enzyme, or like we'll call a little machine, that causes that conversion, and that's called the 5-alpha reductase enzyme. Now, don't worry about memorizing it, but basically, if you have high activity of this enzyme, what you're going to do is you're going to convert more of this into more of this and result in higher levels of DHT. If you've got a lot of that in your system and you've got the gene for hair loss, what that does is it affects that follicle, and that follicle will undergo a process of miniaturization. Meaning that, and in our last episode we talked about hair loss, meaning that you've got a thick hair, and that hair, under the influence of this, will fall out over time, a normal shedding process, and a thinner version of it will go back in its place. And every subsequent cycle of that hair, a thinner version, until the point that it's so tiny that it will fall out and nothing will go back in its place and result in balding.
Now, the interesting thing about this is that the amount of enzyme inside the hair follicle is different follicle per follicle per follicle on the scalp, which is why there is no absolute consistency of the pattern that we see in our men coming in with balding. So basically, the way to think about it is that some or most or all of the hairs in the upper scalp have inherited more enzyme than the hairs in the lower scalp. And that's the critical difference. Genetically, the lower scalp hairs have lower levels of enzyme. Genetically, in balding people, the upper scalp hairs have more enzyme on a follicle by follicle basis. And so if you have more enzyme, and as Dr. Vikram said, you've got more conversion, and you get DHT past a certain critical level in the follicle will begin to shrink in response to it. So as you said, that falls out, that grows back. That's what's going on in the early stages of male pattern balding.
So just to look at it, just to almost repackage that in a certain way, what we're saying is that in essence, if you are going to be subject to male pattern hair loss, these hairs in this part of the scalp, you're going to have more DHT in this area, and therefore these hairs are going to be subject to thinning and falling out, whereas these hairs are going to be less active, and therefore you will maintain that way. And that's why if we walk around town, you see guys that have balded quite significantly. They may be shiny bald at the top, but they maintain a rim of hair at the back.
And if that isn't weird enough, people, just understand that from the eyebrows down,
Yeah.
DHT stimulates hairs. Who knows why? So basically he can do two things. It can either make the hairs thicker and stronger, which is why men often get increased body hair as they get older. That's a stimulatory effect of DHT. Yet at the same time, this unique population of hairs on the scalp can go in the opposite direction. So the body's getting hairier, the scalp's getting balder. A paradox from the same hormone. Truly amazing.
So, Russell, why do we care? As in, why, if I'm going bald, all right, why does this mechanism, why should I pay any attention to that?
So this is where we get into the psychological response of people to balding. So the perception generally is that if I'm losing hair from my upper scalp and it's seen as part of the aging process, then if it happens earlier, then I'm prematurely aging. In other words, I'm looking older than I should be at that stage in life. And for young men, that really affects them. Because basically if they feel they need to be out in the social environment, trying to find a partner for life, they want to be a young, youthful, vital, healthy looking person. They don't want to be a person that looks 10 or 15 years older than they really are. So it really has a big psychological impact. And that isn't just in young men, because we see our older men come in and say, you know, I'm just not happy with what I see in the mirror. I don't feel as confident. And one of the interesting things that we'll come back to many times when we talk about therapies for hair loss is that almost 100% of our patients say that if you can improve the amount of hair I have on my head, it gives me a massive boost in my self-confidence. So they might apologize thinking that it's about a vanity thing, but the reality is it's about a self-confidence thing.
So the other thing I want to sort of touch upon is that this process is an ongoing process, all right? And it happens in a predictable pattern, but what we don't know is where is the starting point and where is the end point. And this is hence why the pattern is not so clear, because some people it can start at the front and start progressing further back. For other people it can start in the crown and then start moving forward. For some people start at both ends and meet in the middle. The other part is we don't know where it ends. Not for everyone who starts to lose their hair. Maybe a shiny bald scalp is not the end point for them. Maybe it's just a bit of loss in the frontal area. So the problem that the challenge that we have when we're meeting patients and discussing this is that we don't know, and there is no way of predicting where the end point is. The only thing we can say though is that the earlier someone presents at a younger age with significant balding, the higher likely that they are going to progress to a much worse case. Would you agree?
I agree with that. And just another thing to remember about human population now. 100 years ago, men were lucky, the average lifespan was maybe 60. Now, today, it's more like 83, 84. So that's another 25 years of balding that people can undergo in their life. So balding isn't going away anytime soon. It's probably becoming increasingly common because we're living longer and because, as Dr. Vikram said, you've got the progression of the hair loss. So I hope this explains to you some basics of the biology behind male pattern balding. And when we go on to our next podcast, we'll start to talk about the therapeutic options. So thank you for listening for today.
Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the show. Again, and not to sound like a broken record, if you're having hair loss issues, please do make sure that you seek the advice of a professional, medical professional about it, and not try and self-diagnose with this. This is a useful tool to be able to have awareness about, but please make sure that you're on the right track. And we'll see you at the next episode.
See you next time.